Hello, my name is Stacy B. and I work for the Arts and Cultural Resources Department here in the city of Lafayette, Colorado. And we are putting together studio art kits to give you something fun to do when you're home. And as you can see, I'm surrounded by some sock animals and I love making sock animals. This tutorial today is about making a sock monkey. We're going to make this sock monkey. The tutorial is long and detailed. I give you a lot of up-close shots of the work I'm doing. And for some of you who already have skills in hand sewing, you might go through the video more quickly, maybe fast forward. But there is a lot of detail included for any beginners that might be watching this video. And I hope you enjoy making a sock monkey. Let's start by investigating what's in our kit. We have one bag with the materials for the sock monkey and a set of written directions in English and Spanish to support you during the project. You have another bag with stuffing for your sock monkey. Taking a look in our main bag, we'll pull out the written directions and keep them as a reference. And let's look at what we have for the animal. There is one pair of socks for making your sock monkey. You only require one pair. We have a selection of different threads to work with on the project. And this bag of other materials, we have buttons and the needle for doing the sewing. Please be very careful with the needle. Don't let little children get the needle. Let's open this up, take a look. Here is the needle. Like I said, be very careful with your needle. It's not particularly sharp, but still, you don't want any little kids getting their hands on that needle. We will start the project with the first sock, sock number 1. It's for the main body. We're going to lay this sock flat to set it up. Where the heel sticks up, that's the bottom of the monkey. That's the head, the bottom, and the cuff is for the legs. Get the sock prepared for cutting it. I'm kind of getting it evened out here, flattening it out. You'll want a good pair of scissors for this project, some scissors that are sharp. Don't let little kids work with the scissors, and if you need help cutting, get someone that can help you with the cutting. Oh, I'm getting ready to go up the middle. Oh, let's take a look. The pattern of the sock actually helps me see the center here, and the ridge from the way the sock was folded can help you determine the center. All right, I'm going to cut up here. I'm cutting up the middle of the cuff. I'm going to cut all the way up to the heel of the sock, and then we can see the sock is open. We're going to turn it inside out to work on it. All of the pieces we're going to work on inside out, and we'll be sewing the legs up. After we sew them inside out, you'll get things lined up, your edges lined up, then we'll turn it right side out when we're done. But in the meantime, we're going to stay inside out. Let's pick out the thread we're going to use for sewing this animal. You get embroidery floss in your kit. It's thick and it's a decorative kind of thread, but we can also use it for sewing. Take about an arm's length. Of course, your arm might be shorter or longer than mine, so that's a general guideline. It's about 18 inches. Cut it, and we will be getting ready for threading our needle. Okay, I want to show you how to thread your needle, tie a knot, and get started with our stitching. So let's take the needle out of the safety paper. grab our piece of thread. I make it so that the thread is just barely showing in my fingertips. And I bring this eye of the needle to that, and I gently open my fingers and I kind of gently press the needle in, needle down, and you can see I got the thread through the eye of the needle. I'm going to pull it through and leave this little tail hanging. That's a couple of inches of thread hanging over. Now let's tie the knot at the other end of the thread. We're going to wrap this thread around my finger, wrap it around your finger, put that little end over, pull that through the loop. That will create the knot. And for sock animals, I like to make 2 knots. So I'm going to do that again and try to keep the thread, the knot together. So you have a big fat knot at the end of this thread. Okay, now we're taking our sock that we've already cut. Remember, it's inside out, and this is how we start sewing. We're going to sew on the outside corner of the foot. We're using a stitch called a whip stitch, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I like to use my fingers as a guide for my stitching, my left hand fingers, because I work with my right hand. If you're a lefty, you can guide your stitches with your right hand and work with your left hand. Bring your needle up through and pull it. Pull your thread through by the thread. Come up again from the other side, the back side. Pull this stitch tight, and you'll see it goes across that seam. Might be hard to see, huh? It's pink on pink. What I'm trying to do when I'm doing the whip stitch is keep these stitches evenly spaced and evenly deep. And a good spacing is maybe a little over 1/8 of an inch. And there's a picture in your written directions about the whip stitch that might be helpful to you. Let's take a look. We'll do a test. Turn this seam around and see. That's how that's looking. All right, so I'm going to continue with this stitching, and we're going to do some time lapse. I sewed the seam of this first leg and I stopped it. And I stop it about 1/2 inch, maybe a little bit more from this top area. Now it's time to sew the other leg. Do it the same way, make sure it's inside out. I'm gonna need to get another length of thread, thread my needle, tie a knot, and do it again. So I finished sewing the second leg, and I want to show you tying the knot. On that first leg, I left this extra long thread. I'm going to use this thread later to close this area up, but now I have to tie the knot on the second leg. So I'm going to make that big loop, bring the thread through, and this is sometimes a little hard. Like if you're pulling your thread through and it tightens down, it might be far away from the fabric. So just try to hold it down. I'm actually just holding it and pulling the thread through, and that makes my knot, it's hard to see because it's pink, but my knot is very close to the fabric. And I'm going to go ahead and do that twice just to make it a fat knot so it doesn't pull through the fabric. We tied that knot. Now I'm going to turn this right side out. So you take this hole in the crotch area and you just bring all the parts of the sock out. Sometimes it's a little tricky. When you're turning your legs right side out, go ahead and really work that fabric out to where you get to your seams that you've sewn. My seams look okay. All right, next leg. Getting those seams, getting that fabric turned out all the way to the seams. So you can see we have what is becoming the body and legs of our sock monkey. All right, time to stuff. So this longer thread is the one I'm going to use to sew this hole closed. So this is the one I tied the knot with. I'm just going to push that inside. Or I could have trimmed it with scissors, but I didn't, so I pushed it inside. All right, we're gonna stuff it here. So grab some of your stuffing that you have in your bag. Just take a little bit at a time, and you just shove it in there. When I get close to finish with the stuffing, I want to make sure, sometimes it gets a little bumpy, a little knobbly, just because you're putting it in sections. So you can kind of massage it around to get it a little bit more even. Oh, so how much do you stuff your monkey? It's really up to you. You can stuff it very full, that can make the cloth stretch out a little bit, or you can stuff it very soft. I would say that this one is medium soft, and I have a little more stuffing to do into the body. You can see this is still empty back here. So I'm going to stuff a little more to get it close to where I want it. Now his little bottom is getting filled up a little bit more. I'm going to shove a little bit more stuffing up in the main body part. All right, so now we have this giant hole that we have to close to finish this first sock. Everything feels pretty good. I'm going to shove that stuffing in even deeper, and I need to thread my needle and sew this hole closed. So let's take a close-up look at how we do that. Okay, so here we are, and I have put the needle on my thread, and this is a little bit tricky. I don't know if you all can see, but this fabric is kind of rolling in a little bit here at the edge. That's actually okay as long as it doesn't roll in too much. And we're going to continue the whip stitch, but we're working with an opening. So I'm going to bring my needle up pretty close to where that last stitch was. Try to keep that stitch distance the same, and go down into that bottom area and back up through. So I'm just going to do this whip stitch and pull by that thread to pull that stitch tight, and I'm just going to keep doing that, paying attention to Is that sock fabric rolling in? Am I having too much stuffing showing, like coming out of my seam? So I just shoved it in there a little deeper. And we just make our way across this opening, closing it from front to back. Here we are at the end. So I'm just gonna pull a couple more stitches through, because now I'm ready to tie a knot. And you might end up with a little bit of a knot showing, but what I like to do is bring this next stitch actually between the two pieces of cloth, so I'm not going through, and I'm going to tie a knot, and then I'm going to try to hide it on the inside. Hold down that thread, pull it tight, make a double knot. Sorry, it's a little tricky here, guys, but I do have a fat knot right there. I'm gonna trim off this thread a little bit, and then I'm gonna shove it inside. I'll use the not sharp end of the needle to try to work that knot to the inside of the seam. If you can't do that, maybe you get the help from someone else, and if they can't do it, maybe you have a little knot that shows. It's not a big deal. Some of those loose threads are being stubborn and they're sticking out, but I'm gonna get them in there. Okay, so I have this opening is now closed. Of course, the seam looks different because we sewed on the outside compared to when we were sewing it inside out, but overall it's pretty good. Okay, now with our main first sock complete for the body and the legs of our sock monkey, we're ready to start on the second sock, where we get a lot of different parts: the arm, the mouth, the tail, and the ears. So let's start by making the arms. So out of your second sock, you can just let it lay normally. You don't have to switch it around like we did on this one to show the bottom. And we're going to cut straight across this cuff. Leave a little bit of the design outside of the heel area. Cut straight across this cuff. If you need help cutting, remember to ask someone that can help you. Now I'm going to cut up the center of this piece, and this turns into two arms. Kind of eye it up. Pattern isn't helping me on this sock, so that's okay. It's not exactly even, it's okay. There, we have two arms ready to go. We turn them inside out, just like we did with the first sock for our sewing. So I'm going to put this one aside for now, and I am going to start sewing this first arm. after I'm done building both of these arms, you saw that I sewed them inside out, I turned them right side out, and then I stuffed them. I also left this thread here. We're going to use that later to attach the arms. And we can think about attaching the arms to the body, but what I like to do first, before I attach these arms, even though I've already made them, is create the face. So let's learn about making the face. Put the arms off to the side, save them for later. The face comes out of the heel of that second sock, sock number 2. Now I'm going to cut the heel out, leave a little bit of that pattern showing. Put this away for later. I'm just going to trim this side a little bit more. Okay, so I have this heel from sock number 2 that's going to be the face of my sock monkey. And the reason I want to do the face, or its mouth, but the mouth then creates the rest of the head, which is its face. The reason I want to decide where this mouth will go first before I do the arms is if I make kind of a short face, or if I make, oh, that would be kind of a crazy long face. But wherever I decide that I want this face to be, the arms should come out lower. So we're going to do this mouth first, and the mouth is definitely a little bit tricky. I suggest that you sew the corners of the mouth down first. I think that the mouth is probably one of the trickier parts of the project, and as I mentioned, I suggest sewing the corners in place first, because that keeps the mouth from shifting while we're sewing. All right, let's try this. You can see I've turned this edge over a little bit. That just keeps it kind of a neater, cleaner look. If you can't manage, you're okay. I'm going to start my stitch from underneath that fold. That is so the knot is hidden. Now I haven't attached it to the face yet, but I have a stitch in this mouthpiece. Okay, now I'm going to go into the fabric of the sock a little bit. I think you guys can see that. You can see that. So I go in this fabric of the sock a little bit, and then I come back up very close to where I already came through the mouthpiece. That is one stitch to the sock. I'm going to do one more stitch, go into that sock a little bit. You can even pull it away and see it's just this little bit of fabric from the sock, but then I go back in to come through the mouthpiece. Pull this stitch through. Now I have the one corner of the mouth attached. There's all these little bits of sock fabric. Just get rid of the threads. Okay, so I guess you can kind of see this. It's a little tricky. Where I want the other corner of the mouth is probably not like way up there and not like way down there. That would be kind of silly, but right across from where I've already decided it would be. Maybe we can even use the stripes on our socks to help us line things up. That's an idea. Anyway, this is kind of fun. I am going to go into the sock, and I'm going to come all the way through his head, all the way through to where I think I want this corner to be. Pull that out. And you don't do a very strong pull on this because, you know, it's going through the head. So just a gentle pull till we get to the other side. I'm switching things around. Actually, before I really sew it, let me kind of eyeball that. Does this look even? I think this looks pretty even. Okay. So I am folding over the edge of this fabric like I did on that other side. Go down into that sock fabric, you know, the body sock a little bit. Come up through the mouthpiece a little bit. One more stitch. Just holds this corner in place. And now hopefully when I start sewing across this top edge, I can keep this mouth even in terms of its, you know, the corners of the mouth in the same place. I think that the top section is sewn on, and it looks pretty even actually in terms of how much space went down. Now we have this bottom area open, and we're going to stuff that with stuffing before we close it up. So take a little stuffing, put it up into that mouth part, which was the heel from sock number 2. I don't know if I want that much. You get to take a look. See, there's his face. Okay, I feel like I have a little too much. I'm going to pull some out. Okay, now we want to close this bottom edge of the mouth. I have enough thread left from sewing that top part to sew the bottom and hopefully not run out. So I haven't tied a knot. I didn't tie a knot here yet. I'm just going to come around, folding this edge under before I go. And what I've found, if you just press this down to the sock body, don't pull it while you're sewing because it stretches. Just try to press it in place and keep it even. It should go okay. So I'm going to fold in this edge, and then I'm going to sew this bottom seam. So I'm here close to finishing the bottom of the mouth, and you can see I still have this cloth folded over, and it's been going actually very well. So just so you can see this in slow motion and regular motion rather, you go into that body a little, you come up through the edge of that mouthpiece, pull it through into that body area, up through that folded over mouth edge, pull it through. Just repeat, it's all a pattern. This whip stitch is all about pattern, trying to keep things even, consistent, and steady. I've done this a lot. So if you have troubles with your project, don't worry. You can undo stitches to make fixes. You can let it be imperfect and try again to learn and grow. Everything takes practice. I've made a whole lot of sock animals. Right now I'm at the end of this bottom seam. I want to try to tie that knot again and hide it. So I'm going to go into the sock body and come up just really close to the corner, but I didn't go through the mouthpiece. Pull this through, make a knot, try to keep that knot very close to where I pulled the stitch through. I do that by holding it down as I pull gently on the thread, and I can feel it under this finger that it's tightening. So I have a little knot here. I'm going to do double don't have to all the time, but I always do double knots on these sock animals because the sock fabric is stretchy. Okay, I have this little fat knot here. It's not perfectly against the fabric, but it's pretty close. And again, I'm going to try to shove that knot inside the mouth to hide it. Sometimes we can't hide our knots. Sometimes we can. So I have my my sock with a mouth. Very exciting. And now I know where I can put the arms because I've determined, you know, where his shoulders are, right? No one's arms really come out of their head. Well, not usually anyway. So we're going to be attaching the arms under the chin of this monkey. And I think that will work quite well. So let's get to the arms. I want to close the arm first. Close the top of the arm first, and then I'll attach it to the body. So I have this thread here. I am going to line up this arm with the seam in the center, and I'm going to make a flat seam up top for the arm. And what that does is let that seam be against the body when we attach it later. It's just a little cleaner looking. So I have to re-thread my needle. Sometimes you have to trim your thread. Oh, that didn't work very well. Sometimes you have to trim your thread to even up those strands before you thread your needle. I'm going to get my needle threaded here. All right, I'm ready to go. When I'm closing this, the top of the arm, let's try to fold in all that rough edge. See, if I fold that in, it's a little challenging, but we can do it. You fold that in, it makes it cleaner, and remember to keep this seam in the center of this side. Okay. All right, so I have this edge folded over, and I am going to put the needle out here by that outside corner. And shift so I can hold this together like that, and I'm going to do that whip stitch around. It's a little tricky to get it started. I want that stitch across that top edge. So I'm taking my time, getting that thread lined up so it goes across the top edge. Trying to keep my stitches evenly spaced and evenly deep. I'm going to take a look at what I've got so far. Looks fine. I'm keeping my hands on this opening to keep it closed, pressed together. That was a little tricky there. I went through the seam, so there was a lot of layers of fabric I just went through. Keep your stitching steady and even. Use the thread to pull stitches tight. I pull a stitch tight after every stitch. By pulling on the thread, not on the needle. Oops. Okay, so there we have it. The top of this arm is closed, and I still have some thread left, which is great because I can use this thread to sew it to the body. Now we need to figure out, where does his arm come out? You know, it's not going to come out of the side of his face. It's not going to come out down close to his legs. I'm going to have it coming out right about where the chin ends. So if you lay your sock on its side, you can see right here I have a little guide. This is the side of the sock. And if I want this right here under the mouth, I put this middle of the arm along this edge here, or lined up with the center of the side of the sock. Now I'm going to do this whip stitch again. I like laying things down to work on them. This is an okay view, I think. So I'm gonna do again like what I did with the mouth. I'm gonna go into this body sock just a little bit like that, and then up through the edge of the arm piece. Into that body a little bit, up through the edge of the arm piece. And continue that rhythm, that pattern, until I get all the way across. Through the body, up through the top of the arm. Into the body, up into the top of the arm. My cat was trying to visit right then. Into the body, up through the top of that arm. Ooh, I'm getting low on thread. I think I have enough, but I'm getting low on it. If you do run out of thread and you're in the middle of doing something, don't worry, don't stress out. Give yourself enough thread to make a knot. Make a knot, rethread, start where you left off. So far I've been very lucky with the lengths of thread I've been using. Maybe it's not luck and years of experience. Okay, so I'm just lining this up again. I'm taking a look. I think I'm okay. Oh dear. All right. I think I have two more stitches, maybe 3. I'm getting very close. Oh, I lost my thread. Happens to the best of us. Give me a minute. Okay, I rethreaded my needle. I am really running out of thread here, but I think I can manage the 2 more stitches I need to do to finish this and still have enough to tie a knot. So into that body, up into the edge of this arm. I'm very careful now how I'm pulling this through. You see how I have that extra thread, so I have to kind of to make it come through. There we go. Okay, now my little tail has to get even shorter, but I've got this. I need 1 more stitch. Up through that final corner of this arm. I'm going to go, here I am under the arm. I'm going to take this little bit of thread, I'm going to go in right at the edge of the body, but I'm going to come out a little ways in. That's where I'm going to tie my knot. I'm not going to try to hide this knot. I have just the wee littlest bit of thread for tying a knot. I think you should have more thread than this for tying a knot, but I can get this tied. I finished sewing this arm on and I managed to tie that knot. That was tricky. But let's take a look at what we've got. So from the side, oh, it's a little bit in the shadow. From the side, you can see that the arm is lined up with this side of the sock. It also looks like it's pretty lined up with the bottom of its chin, of your monkey's chin. And it's a straight seam. This arm seam is hidden underneath of the arm. And there we have him. Look at him coming along. He's got almost a whole face. He's got 1 arm. Time to do this other arm. Remember, we're going to line it up so that the seam is in the middle. Fold the top edge all that rough stuff. Fold that over. Fold that over, get that hidden, and then you can start to sew that closed just like we did on this arm. Sew it closed. When it's sewn closed, I want to line it up to match that other arm, and we'll be ready to move on. So I have my monkey getting so close, right? The next parts will be a tail, which could be optional, but I am going to add a tail. So you decide if you want to add a tail, you'll know how. Ears, which some think are optional, I will be adding ears, and then the eyes, the buttons for the eyes. So let's start with the tail piece. Remember, sock number 2 was for all those other parts, and we're down to just the part where our foot goes into sock number 2, and we're going to make our tail from this part of the sock, and we'll save this part for the ears. So here we go, the tail. I'm going to cut out from here up to the toe of the sock, and I'll keep some of that pink from the toe of the sock so my monkey can have a little pink tipped tail. Just like the arms, we are going to turn this inside out and sew it closed from the tip of the tail down to this bottom corner. I have my needle and thread ready to go. Same stitch, the whip stitch. And we are going to start on this top corner tip of the tail. Come up, use the thread to pull your stitch through, to pull your stitch tight. The whip stitch, pull every stitch tight. Let's zoom in a little and get this going fast. I have my tail finished, turned right side out, stuffed, and now it's time to place it onto the sock monkey. So turn your sock monkey over to show the back, and you're going to want to put your tail somewhere in this area near the bottom. Now if you put it too high, it's weird and looks like a strange nose, and if you put it too low, that just doesn't work either. So very close to this area right here at the where the colors change, right around here is a good spot for a tail. Now there are a couple of ways to do the tail. You could decide to fold it in and fold it closed and attach it just like we did with the arms. And that makes for a very floppy tail, just like how these arms are floppy. Another way would be to sew it on in the round so it just sort of sticks out more. I think I'm going to sew it in the round. This is a little bit tricky. Let me try to get the angle right. I kept this thread from when I was sewing the seam, so I still have quite a lot of thread here, and I will use this to attach the tail to the body. When I figure out where I want this tail to go, I'm going to line up the seam with the bottom, so it's like on the bottom part of the tail. And I am going to fold these edges in. This is like when we made the mouth. You may remember we folded those edges in to make them look clean. Well, I'm going to bring this actually a little further down into the pink of the heel, which is the sock's bottom. Now my thread is just attached to that outside edge of the tail, and I've tucked it under. So I'm just going to kind of let that be where it is. I'm going into the body, just like we did with the mouth, and up through that folded over edge of the tail. Alright, so we're zoomed in. You can see where it's going through the body, piece of the body sock, and up through that folded edge there. Pull the stitch through. And while I'm doing this, I'm just going to hold this tail in place and kind of work my way around this shape like the trunk of a tree. So go down into that sock body a little bit, the body sock a little bit, up through that folded corner. Pull it through. Again, get both the body and the tail into your stitch. Every so often when I'm doing this, I will stop and make sure that things haven't shifted, right? Like that oh no, it's over there. Oh no, it's up over there, kind of crazy and crooked. Just every so often you can stop what you're doing, check your work, make sure it's how you want it. Hopefully you don't have to undo any stitches to fix mistakes, but you can. We can always go back and fix mistakes. But right now I'm feeling good about where this is, so I'm going to continue with this method of doing the whip stitch through both parts, the body and the tail part, keeping that edge of the tail folded in. I'm going to make a slight adjustment here up into that tail. See, I'm turning this sock as I'm working. So remember, you're in control. You can make adjustments, turn things, fix things as you're working. Let me take another look at it. I feel like maybe I've shifted a little bit off center. Looks pretty centered still. I think I'm okay. All right, get myself reorganized here. Tuck in that edge, press it down against that sock, and I'm just going to try to follow that curve as I close this seam. Feeling pretty good about how this is going. Believe me, I've had to redo mouths. I've had to redo tail placement sometimes. Definitely when I was working with my high school students, they would have to go and make adjustments, fix things if they needed to, if they cared enough about their project, which I think, of course, we all should. Okay, I'm getting very close to the end. I'm sewing the tail on. I've got to just tuck that in a little bit. Keep that folded corner of the tail fabric out of my way. Now it seems as though the seam of the tail is maybe not exactly in the middle of this shape here, this form here, but I'm okay with that. It's okay. Basically, the tail looks fine. I have to tie the knot now. I'm going to go in and come up, create that loop, hold that down while I'm pulling. Oops, I'm going to start that over. Create that loop, pull your end through it, then hold this down as you pull the thread through. Remember, that keeps your knot very close to where you exited the fabric. I'm going to try to double that knot up again. That's what I've been doing all along, using doubled knots. Hold it down, make sure it's lined up with the knot you already have, pull it through. It's nice and tight. This is a good knot. It's very close to the fabric. I'm going to trim that off. I might shove that knot in the seam later. I might not, but essentially there's the tail. Time for the ears. So we have this little bit of the sock, second sock left for the ears. We're going to use this folded edge as the part of the ear that goes to the head. So I'm going to cut a shape out here. I'll start on the more narrow side, cutting my shape, because that's my limitation, right? If I make this ear really big, I won't be able to match it over here because this is wider than that. You may want to create a paper model of the ear. Show you that. You could take a piece of paper and you could either draw on it first or just cut out a shape. I think that's a pretty good shape. And then you would lay it down and cut it out. I actually want my ear a little bit bigger than that, but you guys get the idea. So let's just use this, but I'm going to make the ear a little bit bigger. I'm cutting around this kind of half circle shape. I'm giving it extra. Remember, I said I wanted my ear a little bigger. So that's my first ear. You might notice it's not perfectly even, but it's fine. Now I'm going to take this first ear shape, lay it onto the sock. What's left? Line this edge up. And now I'm going to try to cut the second ear based off of the first ear's shape. Okay, so there's my two ears. My recommendation for sewing the ears is to sew them right side out. Don't bother with turning things inside out. It goes wrong often. So we're going to go ahead and sew this shape closed with the whip stitch, just right side out. And we'll see those stitches, and that's okay. That's fine. So I threaded my needle. I have my needle ready to go, my thread, and I'm going to hold the ear, and I'm going to sew this ear closed from the outside, right side out, you may remember. So I am starting with my needle inside of the ear, actually, so that this knot is hidden. Okay, now holding my fabric together and keeping the edges even, I'm going to start doing the whip stitch. Remember the whip stitch, you just try to keep your stitches evenly spaced, evenly deep. I noticed my first stitch was a little shallow, not quite deep enough, so I'm going to make my next stitches a little deeper. We're going to go this ear shape until we get to the end of it. Holding these edges together, doing the whip stitch. Both of my ears are complete, and you'll see that some of this extra thread from the inside of the sock came out. So maybe I'll want to trim that off later, or maybe my monkey will have kind of fluffy ears. I could just decide that later. But I have both of my earpieces, and I left the thread from each sewing session for each ear. I left it attached. Why did I do that? I did that so I can use this thread when I sew it onto the head. But I thought what might be fun to do first before attaching the ears is to put the eyes on. So remember our packet that had the needle and all the buttons? So you'll see you have a lot of buttons in your packet, and your color choices of buttons and thread and everything is customized to whichever pair of socks you got. So I selected pink maybe to go with the pink of the sock animal, even though it's a very different pink. I have this aqua blue that could stand out in contrast to the color of the sock. I have this white, large, very large white buttons. Maybe I'll use those. He does have a pretty big face. I also, in pretty much all of the kits, you have some small buttons that you could perhaps layer. You could layer your buttons. The eyes could have a smaller inside and a larger outside. So now I have to figure out which way I want to go. Do I want to do an aqua blue eye with a black center? Do I want to keep a smaller pink eye with a black center that of course looks much bigger? The center does. Do I want to get wild and stack up 3 colors? Maybe 3 colors? I don't know. Maybe I'll do that. When we're sewing on the eyes, we're going to have to thread our needle, and perhaps I should switch my color of thread from the pink that I've used this whole time. For this whole project I've used pink thread. You can use a thread that is very different in contrast. You could use the same thread the whole time. You could switch out your colors of thread for all the parts you're making. That's really up to you. I think what I'll do, because I got it in my kit, is I think I'll use this brown thread to sew the eyes onto the face of my monkey. I think I will do a 3-layered eye, which is quite a lot of buttons. You don't have to do that. You could just use 1 button for an eye or more. I'm gonna do 3. And I have to figure out where these eyes are going. Where do these eyes go? Let's line up that aqua blue first. I don't think I want it way up high on the head. That just looks a little weird. I don't think I want it right on top of the mouth, but that could work. It could be right here between the pink at the top of the head and the pink of the mouth. But I think I'm going to bring it up a little bit so that it's not quite touching the mouth and it is coming up into that pink area a little bit of overlap. And I think I want one eye here and the other eye here. Yeah, I think something like that. And you'll notice my buttons are a little different from each other, but I'm okay with that. Know that I want my eye here. I'm going to go ahead and stick the needle into the face and pull it up. And this will be hidden by the button. Maybe I could trim that off a little bit, that extra thread. Just trim it off. Maybe. Trim it off a little. Okay, so there's that. Knot is on the fabric, but it doesn't matter. The button's going to go over it. So I feed my needle up through the back of the button. Make sure that's where I want it. Looks a little bit far out. Maybe I'll move it over here a little bit. Okay. So there's my first button. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and add the second button. Remember, putting the needle into the back of it, pulling the thread through. So this button lines up on top of that one. And now I'm adding my third button. I'm entering from the back of the button. And you could decide to have the back of the button be your top. Let's see, maybe I'll do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to use, for my black button, I'm going to have the back of the button face upwards, face us, the viewer. So now I'm putting the needle in from there. Okay, all my buttons are stacked up. You can see that my thread is coming out on this hole over here towards the center of the monkey's face. And I'm going to put my needle down into the hole across. I'm going to just put that down in there and go through all three of those buttons. And I can actually, well, for now anyway, I can pull this away and you can see my needle and you can see that it's through all three buttons. And I'm going to go ahead and put that needle in very close to where I've been working and bring it out and pull it tight. Pull, 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 and now I've got at least one stitch holding this crazy eye in place. Figure out how to kind of peek under, get your needle up into a hole. This time it went through all of those holes, all three buttons. And then I am going to cross over to this hole now. So I want this thread going into all four holes. So far so good with it lining up on those buttons. And I better not pull my needle out over here, right? That's silly. Okay, so I'm going to bring my needle out. Again, kind of hiding under that big button. Pull it through, pull it tight. So I'm going to do a couple more stitches, try to get at least 2 stitches per hole, per set of holes. So I came up through this one, I'm going across to that one, and then this next time, this will be my last stitch. I need to get my stitch up through this hole out here because I only have done 1 stitch there. So I think I've got it. Nope. I'm coming up through this thing. There we go. And 1 more stitch down into the face, like what we did with the corners of the mouth before. So see, I'm coming through. I have 1 eye sewn in place. I think this is in a pretty good spot for sewing the next eye. I sure hope so. Let's get the next eye set up. Well, this is going to be a little bit more challenging because my bottom button only has 2 holes instead of 4 like the others. So I will just focus on sewing through those holes, these 2. let's do these separately. So I'm going to come up through the back of my button, see where it's laying. Do I like where it's laying? Does it look pretty even? My monkey's eyes are a little bit far apart, but I think that's okay. So I think this is a good spot for this eye. And I'm now going to bring my pink button, go up through the back of it, and then my black button. And remember, I wanted to use the back of the button for the top face because it's all smooth, it's the same. So I'll bring my needle up through the back of the black button. And there it is, stacked for my next eye. Okay, so I got my stack of buttons in place, and I've only been sewing across 2 holes because remember, this aqua blue button only had 2 holes. And now I just want to show you how we finish this off, how we tie the knot under the eye. This is my final stitch down into the eye, and you can still kind of bend the fabric back and see where the needle is coming out. Yeah, see the needle coming out? So I'm going to go down into the sock, and I'm going to come out a little bit of a distance away, but it's still going to be behind the buttons where I tie my knot. So I'm going to go ahead and tie my knot there, make a big loop, and remember to hold it down as you're pulling your thread through to keep that knot very close to the fabric. And I'm going to make another knot and try to keep it on top of the first. So my second knot makes it very big. My second knot makes the whole knot big. Holding it down with my finger, pulling it through, and I have my knot there. I can trim this thread now. And I have both eyes sewn on to my monkey. So I'm going to take this ear and I'm going to attach it to the head. And I would like to show you how to do that now. You might remember I still have this extra thread from when I sewed my ear. That's not necessary, but it's helpful if you have that. And from the side, we want the ear probably lined up with this side of the sock. And this is a very helpful spot right here that shows you. It also lines up pretty well with like where an ear should be. If you think it looks good there, you can do that. The higher up you go with ears, the more like a teddy bear it looks. I don't know if I want my monkey to have a teddy bear appearance. And of course, if the ears go too low, well then what is that ear doing down there by the shoulder? So we're gonna put the ears right here on the side. Kind of lines up with the corner of the mouth and the top. And of course that depends on how big the ear is and how big of a face you made. I made a kind of big face, and I made kind of big eyes because I have a big face. So here's how we sew the ear on. I'm gonna actually lay it down against the sock, and this is the seam I want to create. And I have my thread here, and it's at the bottom of the ear, so I'm gonna start at the bottom. And just getting it lined up here. So I'm starting at the bottom, and I'm gonna hold this in place while I work. And we go into that body. Remember, you're going into the body about an 1/8 of an inch, and then I'm going up through that fold in the ear. I'm actually gonna start lower. All right, I'm going up through that fold, and I'm doing this whip stitch all the way up. And I know that the ear is laying down to work. Just makes working on it easier. And later, after I'm done sewing this seam, I'll try to pull the ear up and away. So we're doing this whip stitch along the seam, following the same methods I've been using all along. Similar to sewing the mouth on, similar to sewing the tail on, similar to sewing those arms on. Very similar techniques, keeping things even as much as possible, making sure they're aligned. And then I think before I tie my knot, I'll make sure I can flip my ear out so his ears aren't flat. Okay, so there's my last stitch, but I'm not going to tie my knot yet. I'm going to make sure that I can kind of turn that ear out. So see, his ear's sticking out now. And it's nicely attached. Ow, you're pulling my ear. Nicely attached. So now I'm going to go ahead and tie the knot up here. I'm going to go into the head, and then I'm going to come down a little bit behind the ear, and I'm going to have the knot coming out right here, but it'll be behind the ear. It won't show too much. Make a big loop, hold that down, pull the thread through. Felt a little loose. I think it'll be okay. Make a double knot. I always make double knots on my sock animals. Okay, so we have a knot that's very close to the edge of where the ear seam is, and I'm gonna just trim that extra thread off. And we have one ear to go, and then our sock monkey will be done. I feel like my sock monkey's eyes have a lot of space between, but I've decided that's okay with me. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and sew that other ear on, and I'll be done. All right, I finished sewing the second ear on, and there you have it. The sock monkey is finished.